Everyone, good afternoon. Just consent just popped up. I consent. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tunde Bidokobe, and I'm glad to be here. Thanks to the Tech Hive Advisory guys for setting this up. I am the co-founder and CEO of RegFile. What RegFile we do is we provide AML CFT compliance solutions for financial institutions in Africa. I'm glad to be able to join this panel to discuss key privacy challenges that come up in fraud detection. So glad to be here. I'm looking forward to the whole exercise and conversations.
Thank you very much. So now we come to Dr. Obum. I sincerely apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name.
Yeah.
Trust me, I'm trying my best.
No, it's Obum. That's perfect. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Very, very excited to be here. My name is Obum. Obe is actually not part of my name. I think that's a title which means OBE, Officer of the British Empire. So, but I think somebody added that as part of the name. So that's not my name. We have only one Obe here. Yeah, so background, I spent about 20 years working at Google and then Google DeepMind. Google DeepMind is AI side of Google. So overall about 30 years now in tech and in AI, and then recently left to build Mastery Hive. At Mastery Hive, we are building agentic AI solutions to empower financial institutions to streamline their operations and with greater speed, with integrity, and with care for their customers. Some of the use cases we've been working on is on fraud, compliance, reconciliation, and other use cases. So looking forward to the chat.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the correction, because I always thought that your name is Obi or something. So yeah, it's glad to not be wrong on the one. All right, thank you very much, Doctor. Now we come to the woman in the middle. And if you're very conversant with security, you probably must have heard man in the middle. But fortunately for us today, we have a woman in the middle in person of Onyewo Kolosa. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I know some persons are joining from outside of Nigeria, so good day to you from where you're joining from. My name is Onyewo Kolosa, as I've been introduced. I lead operations at Tech Hive Advisory. I've done had a stint at banking practice, and here now where I do more of compliance work. Most of my core competencies are AML, CFT, CPT compliance. Also, I've had some bit of stints with compliance with financial technology service industry as well. And in Tech Hive, I wear many hats. Aside being CEO, I'm also a policy analyst, and I just help design systems for companies and for organizations that helps them to stay compliant. So that's pretty much what I do. It's a pleasure to be here, and also a pleasure to be speaking alongside such brilliant minds. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ray. Thank you so much for your introduction. Like I told you before, she's the woman in the middle and she's just very capable. So now we come to Zach. And yes, very quickly before we get to Zach, if you're joining us from outside the country, you're joining us from anywhere, you can just drop that in the chat box. We would love to hear from you. Thank you very much. So yeah, Zach, you're up next. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Thanks, Victoria. Hi, everyone. I'm Zach, co-founder and CEO of Archer. We use AI to detect and prevent fraud at banks and fintechs throughout Africa. I used to run a digital bank in Nigeria called PayHippo. We would give loans and bank accounts to small businesses in Nigeria. So that means I basically spent years of my life fighting off fraudsters and bad guys. I personally would go and do fraud money recovery. So what we do now is using AI to detect fraud, but we also have a history of literally going and hunting for fraudsters on the ground in the streets of Nigeria.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. So I think we can get the conversation started now. But so a good place that I would like to start is, let's really understand what we're talking about today. What exactly does fraud detection entail? what exactly are we trying to detect? And I understand when we say, oh yeah, this is Nigeria, and that there's this entire stigma around Nigerians and when it comes to fraud and things like that. But is that really what fraud detection is about? What does fraud detection really entail? So I think I'd like to start with Dr. Babatunde.
Okay, I'll go first. So what does fraud detection really entail? I think from the perspective of, I can speak from my perspective as what we do at Recfile. Fraud detection, you can, so I guess it's a nuanced conversation. From my perspective, and I can give only my perspective, fraud detection is those processes that you put in place to be able to protect, number one, protect your financial ecosystem. Number two, to be able to catch the bad guys that are trying to exploit the financial ecosystem. And number three, provide those learnings that you can, on a holistic and wider approach, you can share with law enforcement agents to be able to create specific typologies, use cases that you can use and feedback into the system. So for me, that's how I look at fraud detection, those three frameworks: stopping and protecting your customers, stopping the bad guys, and then providing those insights that you can use to drive improvement in the overall understanding of the financial ecosystem.
Okay, so let me ask a follow-up question to that, right? So based on what you've just said, who will be the targets of fraud detection? And when I mean targets, do we mean individuals? Like, is it just individuals, everyday people like me who just maybe need quick cash or something like that? Or businesses, organizations can also be targets of fraud detection? What do you think?
I mean, both. So if we look at it, and I'm taking a step back, fraud detection is trying to identify people that are trying to, and using one of those frameworks I mentioned, they're trying to identify people that are trying to take advantage of the financial ecosystem. Within the financial ecosystem, you can have individuals, you can have businesses. So if I am a financial institution, I can onboard Victoria as a company, or as a person, I can onboard Tech Hive Advisory as a company. So those are both financial players within the ecosystem, and both types of individual. I'm not saying Tech Hive or Victoria will try to game the system, but both could also try to game. So is anybody that is a player within the financial ecosystem can be the object or the subject of fraud detection. Is not based on whether you're an individual or a business. Anybody that takes that uses the financial ecosystem can be a subject of fraud detection.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll go now to Onye to hear a perspective on this, right? So the question is this: with the current business landscape in Africa, what are the factors as necessitated fraud detection for companies generally? And I understand that usually, and in time past, there is a lot that has to do with trust. I want to do business with this person. I trust that this entity is fair, that they are legitimate, right? But recently, it looks like businesses now have to invest more when it comes to fraud detection. So what are the factors that have necessitated this this increase, or this steady increase in fraud detection, the need for fraud detection? What are the factors that have necessitated it?
Right, so thank you for that question. And to answer that question, I'll first start by saying that when we talk fraud detection, it's not even just about catching the bad actors. It's also about protecting our systems, protecting the people that use the systems, and also building trust for the systems. I think it's important to set that context to answer the question, because we've literally witnessed a rapid shift in how we do business. And from financial technology to ride-hailing services, we've seen a lot of shifts. And with these shifts comes bad actors who are trying to take advantage of the system to their own benefits. So with the increase in the shifts, it's also going to be because, I mean, if the system gets smart, the bad actors will get smarter because they're trying to take advantage of the system. So one of the things you find is the rapid increase or rapid shifts in the system is one of the things that has led to the need for fraud detection. Because as the system gets smarter, the fraudulent actors get smarter. And also with that increase in the smartness of fraudulent actors also comes the need for regulatory compliance. So it places pressure on the regulators and also on the system entirely. So we see regulatory pressure as well. Financial institutions are required to maintain strong internal control systems in line with the central bank's AML CFT framework. Central bank always releases guidelines, tweaking and retweaking its systems because of the increase in the innovation of the actors. Permit me at this point to, I stumbled on the NIBSS fraud report that was comparing the gap in the increase in the fraud from 2023 to 2024. And it sort of recorded that between 2023 and 2024, there was an increase of about 34.59 billion in terms of fraud. That is a lot of figure, right, for an ecosystem like ours. So it just goes to show us that the actors are not getting, they're getting more innovative just as the system, so the moment you release a new solution, there's an actor somewhere that is trying to understand how it works, not because they want to use it, but because they want to misuse it for their own advantage. Another thing that we see is also the need for consumer trust. You want your consumers to trust you. I used to work in the bank before. There are times that when there is something that happens with one financial institution, the CBN just goes on, releases like an internal memo to all the financial institutions to say, we noticed this, we noticed that. It's important for us to start to do this and to do that. You then start to see all these banks, because they want to build consumer trust. When they then start to work on the errors detected, they then release a circular to their customers to say, we want you to trust us, and that's why we are saying this to you. Please don't do this, don't do that. So the need for consumer trust as well is important. And the final one is commercial sustainability. Fraud is expensive. So the posture should be responsible, not reactive. So you want to do fraud detection by design. So because of commercial sustainability, you don't want to be in a place where fraud has already happened. So you want to take that responsible action or responsible posture now and not reactive. Because by the time fraud happens, there are so many things that comes to play. The people who are liability, indemnity, and all of that. So there's that commercial sustainability where it sort of places a responsibility on organizations to take the shape of just being more responsible. So I would say that all of these factors sort of tells on why there is need for an increase in fraud detection.
Well, that's a lot to unpack. And I'll come back to you on some of the points that you have made, especially when you say something along the lines of fraud detection by design and regulators taking a reactive stance, right? So I'll come back to you on that, but then let's move quickly, right? So I'll come to Zach now, right? And so this is like a background to the question. Fraud detection based on where we are going to now relies heavily on data collection, analyzing the data that has been collected previously to draw conclusions, right? However, more businesses are usually very concerned about the lawful basis for processing personal data for fraud detection, especially with new regulatory developments. As we have with the Nigerian Data Protection Act, the GAID, which are recently, which is a regulation. So how can organizations justify lawful base for processing personal data in fraud investigation?
I feel like I'm supposed to pitch working with Hive right now. Yeah. So Hive is an expert in lawful usage of data using the GDPR and local NDPR legal bases for processing data. I feel like that's the answer, honestly. Give me something a little bit more detailed. Give me something a little bit more beyond just what Hive does. I can't hear you on mute. I guess you're on mute, so am I supposed to keep advertising for Hive? Happy to do it. But it's just me because I can't hear you.
Victoria, we can't hear you. I think you're on mute. Now you're on mute.
Oh my God. Okay, yes. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Did you hear my question?
No, we didn't hear anything.
Oh my God.
Victoria, can you try to turn off your video and maybe just use your audio? Hopefully that could
But
be
I'm so
better.
sorry.
Oh, this is bad. Is it raining today?
Is it better now? You can hear me? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, yes.
All right, great. So let me ask the question again, right, Zach? Okay, so I was saying that organizations sometimes struggle with lawful basis when it comes to processing personal data for fraud detection. But again, it's also, from what you have heard so far, fraud detection is not just in the interest of protecting the consumers or the customers, as the case may be. There is also the bit where the organizations need to protect themselves from bad actors. So how do you in your own experience and from the time that you have spent in the space with PayPal and now Archer Protect, so how do organizations manage or how can organizations justify the lawful basis for processing personal data when it comes to fraud investigation?
Yeah, great. So this is what we heard before, so it's okay. I gave the first answer, which is to work with TechHive. I'll give the second answer, which is like actually detail. When you're preventing fraud for a company, so like at Archer, we use AI to detect fraud. Banks and fintechs already have anti-fraud departments. Those departments are analyzing customer data to now go and make sure the current users they have are good guys, to make sure the bad guys don't get on the platform, and finally to make sure that the good guys are not having their accounts taken over or getting scammed by some other bad guys. So you're constantly analyzing your customers' data. Okay. This is perfectly in line with all data privacy laws. This is an appropriate use of data because it's required to serve your customer. What is not required to serve your customer, and where people get into a lot of trouble, is when you're using data for purposes outside of serving your customer. So for example, let's say we're asking the user for more data. A bank says, hey, give me not just a selfie, I also want a selfie of your next of kin. Or, hey, give me your utility bill. Maybe that could be used for fraud prevention, but it becomes incredibly illegal to get this information and process it if it's not for serving the customer. So in Nigeria and many other countries, people have collected data from their customers, and then they'll go and sell it and make money off of selling phone numbers, selling their email addresses, selling their contact information for advertising and marketing purposes. That's the difference. In fraud prevention, the goal is to collect as much information from your customer as possible, of course, without bothering them, without frustrating them, because they'll only give you so much before they get frustrated and go somewhere else. That is perfectly legitimate, in line with all NDPR and data protection regulation. But if you deviate from that use of data and you start using that data for other purposes, you immediately are now breaching all data protection standards.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, please, Dr. Babatunde.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I just kind of just buttress what Zach has said, but I guess come from the legal side, which is kind of my field. I think under the Nigerian Data Protection Act, obviously, as you're aware, they are the primary lawful basis for processing personal data. I think where this kind of falls into, I think in reality, and when we have these conversations internally, you could possibly make a case for multiple areas where the lawful basis exists. There's legitimate interest, there's a legal obligation, there's also contract performance, but also vital interest. So you can make any of those cases. In my opinion, and when we have the conversations with our customers, we say legitimate interest is probably where you sit the most comfortably, because you're able to show that you need that process to process that information in order to carry on the business and provide the service that you want to provide. The critical thing that the GAID has then set out is that if you are going to be doing that, if you're going to use the legitimate interest as the basis for processing and doing all this fraud detection and prevention and the like, then one key thing that you should be doing is doing an LIA, a legitimate interest assessment. And the GAID actually sets out what that template looks like. I can't remember what schedule it is. I'm sure the Tech Hive advisory guys know very much what that schedule is. And so if you're going to be using legitimate interest, I think that is the fundamental basis that you have to be using to create on top of it. If you're going to be using legal obligation, so from an AML/CFT perspective, which is, I have to confess, I'm not a privacy expert. My expertise comes around AML/CFT. There is an obligation that exists for instance, if you're onboarding customers, there's an obligation to collect their information to be able to verify them using KYC. That legal obligation exists in Money Laundering Prevention Act. If you're going to be monitoring the activity, that obligation sits there as well. So you could use the argument around a legal obligation because you're complying with AML laws. So there are multiple ways that you can do it. I think legal legitimate interest is probably where you'll sit the most. And if you're going to do that, then you have to do that legitimate interest assessment. So I just wanted to buttress, because Zach was coming from the operational perspective, because he has been on the ground and he's seen on a day-to-day basis how that happens. But I just kind of came from the legal side because that is where the field that I come from. So sorry for tacking on top of that response.
Oh, thank you very much. That was a very beautiful contribution. So what both of you have said now is that, number one, when you're processing personal data, you have to have in mind the principle of data minimization. Don't collect more than you need for this fraud detection process. And then legitimate interest is like the most comfortable lawful basis that you can choose as a business. And when you're also relying on legitimate interest, don't just rely on it. Conduct an LIA in compliance with existing regulation. And I think that that's a very wonderful contribution. Now I'll come to Dr. Obum. Yes, who is not an OB. So let me give a background to this question. If you tell the bad guys that we are out to get you, chances are that everybody wants to act like they are the good guys, right? So in fraud detection, there is the aspect where you need a level of secrecy, right? That's part where you keep your cards close to your chest because you don't want the bad actors to know that you are onto them, but you do have these measures internally to address fraud detection, right? So the question is this: how can companies manage the tension between secrecy in fraud investigation and the consumer's right to be informed? Because again, from what Dr. Babatunde said and what Zach said, and based on regulatory developments that we have in Nigeria, there is the need for data subjects and customers to be informed of what you need to use their data for. But then there is also this conflicting part where you need to maintain a level of secrecy in that sense when it comes to fraud investigation. So how can organizations manage the tension between these two concepts so that they can have an effective fraud investigation system?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the starting point is always to think about or understand that you need to respect the integrity of the investigation process. So there needs to always be an immediate disclosure where possible. Actually, an immediate disclosure in some cases might compromise the fraud probe if you're already carrying out an investigation. And might alert the bad actors on what your steps are. But companies can really rely on specific exemptions from some of these policies that are in place. And then there's also the need to understand that being transparent doesn't always mean full disclosure, right? So you can be transparent without disclosing fully what you're investigating and all that. You can inform the customers, especially because the customers are always the ones feeling the pain. You can inform the customers about the existence of fraud. You are carrying out this investigation or monitoring without maybe revealing all the detection parameters or the trigger threshold that you are using, because that could also then help bad actors know how you are what parameters and trigger threshold you've put into place. So really it's about, for me, I think it's about balancing the messaging, being transparent without giving everything out about the parameters or the disclosure you have in place. But for us, from a technical, I know we'll get into the technical bit of it, but from a technical part and bit of it, which is where AI starts coming in, is your ability to have what we call explainability for anything you are doing, or any of these cases you are investigating, for you to be able to explain that to customers if they ask for more details, or even to the regulatory authorities, for you to be able to explain that, so that it doesn't look like a black box. You are doing this investigation, nobody actually understands what's going on. You need to always be able to offer that full explainability, which is where AI also comes in the process. You are
Okay.
muted.
Yes. I was about to do it again, and then I saw that I was muted. I had to unmute my mic. Yeah, so thank you very much for your contribution. So from what you said now, it's safer for organizations to rely on specific exemptions from regulations, right? So that they are able to latch in on that to conduct their fraud investigation and their fraud detection process. And then that's when you're also using AI systems, you should be able to explain everything you're doing to the end customers. But then you need to manage transparency and full disclosure when you want to take advantage of specific exemptions under regulation. And I think that that's a very brilliant one. Thank you very much, sir. So now to the next question. I'm coming back to Dr. Babatunde, the one who is the OB on the call. So yeah, my question is this. Okay, so AI is beginning to switch things up, and AI is like the new cool kid on the block. Everybody's talking about AI in this, AI in that, AI in design, AI in fraud detection, right? So how is AI and machine learning transforming fraud detections compared to the traditional KYC system that we have, the traditional fraud detection and background check systems that we have? So how is AI machine learning transforming fraud detection, and what are the compliance risks that are involved in the process?
Okay, I will answer that question in 1 second. I'm sorry that I'm kind of jumping into other people's questions just because I have my legal hat on. I just wanted to just add something to what Dr. Obum said, and just to, I guess, in addition to what he said, one of the key things, especially for if you are a financial institution in Nigeria, and then because when you flag a transaction, or when you're doing fraud detection, a fraudulent transaction is also a suspicious transaction. And so there is a legal obligation under the legislation in Nigeria to report suspicious transactions. And that reporting goes to the NFIU. Specifically in I forget whether it's in the Money Laundering Prohibition Act or one of the regulations on the back of it, is that you have actually clear obligation to not disclose to someone if they are being investigated or a suspicious transaction is about to be reported. And if you do disclose, then there is a clear penalty and criminal liability that goes with that. So it's completely, I 100% agree with Dr. Obum, but you have to also kind of read it in the sense of what are your legal obligations that exist under additional legislation. So there's a clear penalty, criminal penalty, if you disclose to someone that they are being a transaction is being investigated and is about to be reported to the NFIU. So I just wanted to make that point. And in replying that, I've now forgotten the question that you asked me, Victoria. So please, can you ask that question again? I'm sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. So I asked, okay, now let me check my notes. Okay, so my question is, how is AI and machine learning transforming fraud detection, and what are the compliance risks involved?
I guess for me, the biggest compliance risk in AI and machine learning, because I'm not going to claim I'm the expert. My CTO told me why he's the real expert as it comes to AI and machine learning. But for me, the biggest risk around is algorithm bias. That is something that it's something that you have to constantly be thinking about. I think there is specific references within either as the NDP or the GID, I'm not too sure now, around discrimination. And so, and let me take a step back. So if, for instance, I want to detect fraud, one of the parameters that you look at in detecting fraud is, because you're creating a profile of the person, and there are certain individuals have certain characteristics that skew them on the risk profile. And so it could be your location. So say, for instance, let me not offend anybody on this call, so I won't mention any particular locations in Lagos, for instance, but there's certain locations that might be known for fraudulent activity. There's also certain demographics, whether your age or whatever, that might be more known to do certain activities. And so what you need to, and I mean, in creating a risk profile and determining if something is potentially fraudulent, the engine looks at a number of different inputs. And unfortunately or fortunately, some of these inputs include things I've just mentioned. So the risk there is if you have an AI model or a model that skews heavily towards those things that could be looked at as discriminatory. If, for instance, your model is constantly spitting up individuals that fall between the age of 18 to 24 as the people that are potentially doing fraudulent transactions. And so it's just that for me, that is a big risk bias. And I'm glad that the GID has set out some guidelines around how you kind of manage that risk. I forget off the top of my head, but I think there's an index, a DSV index or something like that, that the GID has said that you have to have when you're doing it. So that's one of the risk bias. The second risk that I see around AI is, it's also around decision. So the reason why we have AI machine learning, for example, in transaction monitoring, is scalability. If I only do 10 transactions a day and I'm the only compliance officer, I can review those 10 transactions and I can determine whether or not they are suspicious, fraudulent. But then 10, when you take 10 to 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000 to 1 million, you can't actively replicate the number of people to be able to do that job. And that's where the beauty of transaction monitoring engines with AI come in, and that's how they're able to be effective. Now, when you do those things, you want to be able to give the system the ability to maybe not make decisions, but to be able to make suggestions or make inferences or make conclusions. And so I know there is, from a privacy perspective, in Nigeria under the NDP and I think under the GID, there are requirements and regulations around making automated decisions about people based on basically making automated decisions. So that is the risk again. When you have a system where there is no I'm saying man in the middle, but not in the context of that man in the middle. But when you have somebody there that is able to then make that final determination about whether something is fraudulent, suspicious, or whether you should give somebody a loan or whatever, if you should have that human person or human decisioning within the loop. And so if you have systems that just they want to automate everything, that is a risk. So those are, I think, top of my head, those are the two top risks that I think about automated decisioning on people's that affect their rights, and then also bias and algorithmic bias and how that kind of affects certain types of individuals, certain geographic areas. So that is my response.
All right, thank you very much.
I'm gonna copy Tunde's style and jump in on questions. So
all right,
that was a really great answer. Yeah, it was a really great answer, because one of the biggest issues when AI and data analytics goes wrong is then, especially in financial services, is you end up blocking and causing stress for good customers. So this is actually where a lot of regulatory problems happen. And Nigeria, I love my fellow Nigerians. Nigerians will never be silent when there is an issue with their bank or fintech. So if their account is blocked and they're just trying to send and receive money and they're not some fraudster, they will email CBN immediately. And then they will CC the company and say, hey, CBN, this company is not letting me access my account. I want to report them. So most of the compliance issues come from actually pissing off and frustrating your good customers, right? So per Tunde's point, when you have models set up that are rudimentary and really just not well done, when you have rules set up, like, hey, we're gonna block people from this region no matter what, you're asking for trouble. So that's why we had to build Archer, because when we're using AI to detect fraud at banks and fintechs, like, it's not simply saying, hey, let's do an AI model and then that's great, and finally we have AI and we can brag about how great that is and how we have such a nice system. No, it requires a lot of work to do this the right way. Okay, if your AI model is just detecting folks between 18 and 50 years old, that was a great example, the age bias, that means you're not doing it right. And that's a big problem. It means you're going to block your good customers, which is terrible for business. You're going to have regulatory issues. And the bad guys are probably still slipping through the cracks anyway.
So thank you very much.
I can also come in briefly on that point.
All right,
I think the point that Babatunde made.
We're just going to keep coming in. You're welcome. Go.
Yeah, that's
you're
excellent.
welcome.
Yeah, I think just to add one other risk that we've seen as well is something called opacity, which is this idea of AI models end up being like a black box algorithm, especially when you start operating at that scale that Babatunde talked about, right? If you have mostly rule-based or static rules in place that buckets everybody like age group or location under one category of flag and all that, is harder to explain to even regulators what you are flagging them for, especially in cases where those flags are false positive. Again, this is where if it's done right, AI then offers that whole explainability at scale, right, for millions of transactions. But without making it a one-size-fits-all, you can personalize those explanations based on actually what's happening with the particular customers, and then makes it much more easier to explain to regulators or any other party. But that's one risk that is also known when AI, especially when it's not done right, you then have that black box algorithm challenge.
Thank you very much. Onye, do you also want to say something?
Yeah, so I mean, everyone has made great points. I just think that a summary of everything is maybe not summary, but the highlights is just ensuring that there is proper implementation and management, just like Dr. Obama said, because again, bear in mind that as much as AI can help with detecting false positives, if there is no proper implementation and management of the systems, you may actually be flagging a customer wrongly. And when you do that, the customer will not stay silent, especially if there are reputational damages involved. So I think that the balance that we need to have as we touching down from everything Dr. Babatunde has said down to Zach's operational perspective to things, and Dr. Obum is, as we use these systems, we cannot cut off the part of implementing and managing it. And that happens, and humans are the ones who do that. So we have that responsibility to implement and manage, because if anything goes wrong and somebody is flagged that shouldn't be flagged, people won't be quiet. Like Zach said, Nigerians won't be quiet. So people won't be quiet. They'll definitely want to ask for liability, and they'll go to the CBN and say, I was wrongly flagged, my reputation has been damaged, and make a lot of noise around it. So we also just want to pay attention to that. So just wanted to add that to it.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I like the point that Nigerians will be quiet. They will make memes out of the entire situation, but trust me, they will never be quiet. So yeah, Zach, let me come back to you, right? So eventually, one of the points that was made while answering the last question was that yeah, AI is here to aid efficiency, right? To make the entire process more efficient, especially when you're scaling, like Dr. Babatunde mentioned. You know, it's easier for Zach to sit down and review the application of 10 people compared to now that he has to review about 10,000 people, or maybe even 1 million people. So AI is helping Zach automate that process, right? But now I'm also getting that we entirely cannot put everything in the hands of AI and say, you know what, there's an AI system for this, and we're putting our hands off. So let the AI system do it, and we'll take whatever output we get from the AI system. And then that means that we now have to resort to humans again. The humans that might not be very efficient in doing the large scale work, that AI is now here to help them out. Now we are resorting to humans to also then maintain efficiency or maintain the best outputs when it comes to AI. So my question is this: how do you think humans can catch in on, or how can we make the human review process even more efficient? Because again, if AI flags about maybe 10,000 potentially fraudulent transaction, it means that Dr. Babatunde Obe has to sit with those 10,000 transactions again to be sure that we are flagging He's saying he's not going to do it. So it means I have to sit with those transactions again to then be sure that, all right, if you are flagging this person, we are flagging them for the right reasons, knowing that they are Lagosian and they will not take it easy if there's any error in the output, right? So now we are coming back to the humans, and there is the possibility of human fatigue, right? Where there can still be mistakes. So how then do we manage that human in the loop system to ensure that we still have the best outcomes? And if you're also operationalizing that, what are the things that humans need to know when it comes to AI outputs, right? To ensure that we still get the best outcome in fraud detection.
Yeah, one of the biggest misunderstandings of AI and fraud prevention is, or just AI in general, is saying, hey, is it AI or humans? I'm in like 10, 20 WhatsApp groups of Nigerians, and everyone is just constantly arguing about whether AI is going to take their job, whether AI makes sense in Africa. It's always so dramatic. It doesn't need to be this dramatic. There's a middle ground here where, look, it's not yes or no to AI. It's how does AI help a fraud team? So the reason why AI is useful is because it can read more data points than a single human can read, and it can understand it often in ways that are better than a human can understand it. That does not mean that AI needs to make final decisions on all of your transactions. It does not mean that the final decision on whether a bank account is approved or whether a loan is approved, it does not need to be done by AI for you to get value out of AI. Instead, AI systems can read all of the data points, collect insights on the data that humans would not have found, and do that all in under 1 second. And then give those insights immediately to the fraud, risk, and the credit teams. That makes these teams more powerful than ever before. So it's not a matter of whether AI can be like come to the wrong conclusions, et cetera. Should we use it or should we not? No, AI needs to be put in place to supercharge your team, to flag things that wouldn't have been caught immediately and protect customers, and to read more data points than a human couldn't otherwise read and give those insights to the fraud teams. That's one use of AI. I could talk about this all day because our company literally uses AI to prevent fraud for banks and fintechs every day.
Can I jump in?
It would be weird if you didn't.
and I'm actually going to
Yes,
jump in.
yes.
I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to ask Dr. Obum to also tag in because so one of the things, and I think he's probably the best expert that can. I'm adding to what Zaka said, just buttressing it from from an additional perspectives. I would like Dr. Obum to kind of talk about agentic AI because I think there is some there is some use cases there that can help around that kind of replacing the human conversation or enhancing what the human does, and he's the expert on that, so I would like to defer to him on that. But before I ask him to step up, I just wanted to just mention additional points from the person. So back with AI is fantastic. I love AI. When I was a first year lawyer in a law firm, one of my jobs was to be able to, when a client comes and the client asks for a legal opinion, my job is to go and do the research and do what is called the first draft. Do the first draft and then provide it to my senior associate or my partner, and that person then reviews it and says, "Oh, I don't agree with this. Go and change this. Go and change that," and then go away and bring it back again. That is how I see the use of AI in a different scenario, because effectively what AI does is you're not divesting your or delegating your decision making process to AI. You're asking it to provide you with context, information upon which you can build on. And so that is one thing that if you are using AI to decide everything, then so on that point about millions, I mean, yeah, you can't review millions, and then if you're doing million transactions, trust me, using systems that we use, is a fraction, a very, very small fraction that would be flagged. And then so you're not reviewing a million transactions. So that's the first point around AI supports you in that first draft process. The second thing is something that Dr. Obum mentioned around the importance of explainability. One of the issues that historically financial institutions had with machine learning is that for you to be able to understand what the system is spitting out, you had to have machine learning engineers, really, really expensive people that to be able to explain to you what is going on. AI has provided explainability where it can tell you, I've done this. This is why I've done this. Do you agree? So that explainability cuts down a lot of time. So that's a point about AI. One thing about even just deploying AI. So I think there was a conversation about flagging people and then people complaining. And yeah, Nigerians complain a lot. I have a different experience in a different world where I used to see so many of these complaints where Nigerians are complaining to financial institutions and stuff. And yes, Zach is correct. They will email you and email everybody else. People that don't even the president, they email everybody. But the point there is that before you deploy, I mean, it's just good practice. Before you deploy any kind of solutions or any features that would affect the mass of your customer base, you have to then use things called sandboxes. You can put the sandbox, you can model what it would look like in real time. So you say, if I provide this AI and throw maybe historical data and then say, okay, if this happens, how many flags am I going to get? Which of them are false positives? So that is good practice for anybody that is deploying a solution that would affect the potential bank accounts of customers. You should be putting it in a sandbox first to see what it looks like in fake life before you bring it to real life. The final point I wanted to make is around compliance processes. So the importance, and this is my legal and compliance hat on, the importance is you can't have, as a financial institution, you can't basically just delegate your whole thinking process to AI. What you have to have developed internally is your own compliance processes. You have your standard operating processes on what you do. If this happens, this is how you're going to respond. This is what you're going to do. So if you don't have that, then you don't have anything to start from. And I think it's a good segue into what Dr. Obo might share about agentic AI, because one of the things that you have to is basically you're telling it what to do, and then it's then able to then go on the back of that. So I just wanted to add to that, and then I'll pass on to Dr. Obo.
Yeah, sure. Happy to share. So the way I if I was speaking to my 7-year-old daughter, the way I usually like to think about agentic AI or AI agents, as some people will call it, is to remember the keyword collaboration, right? So collaboration, humans are very, very good at collaborating. So if you think about the KYC process or compliance process that Batunde talked about, you have a number of people in a team collaborating to make that whole process happen. Maybe this person is looking at the passport IDs and all these things to make sure that they are real. They are not. There's another person in that whole team that is looking at for driving licenses, all other documents, or checking NIN in Nigeria, NIN database to make sure that the what's been provided is correct, right? So different people have different roles they are playing. Or you go to the fraud space, fraud analysts in a team, they also have their different areas of specialization. What agentic AI does in that sense is you then have these agents, right, that are specialized in different areas of that task, right? So an agent is still thinking about the NIN database, making sure that all the information provided is valid. There's another agent that is looking at all the documents that are provided, also making sure that they're actually not fake, which is where the whole account takeover and identity theft comes in. So there are different specialized agents working collaboratively together. But at the end of the day, like a team, what you want is, can this customer successfully go through a KYC process? And AI agents work together in a group to make sure that that happens within seconds, right? As immediately the customer uploads or submits all the information. This is something that typically we take a human being or that whole team a number of hours, if not days, to complete. And then, so that's one thing that AI does very well, and then does it at scale, agentic AI. But back to your question around humans, where humans then comes in. What we're also not saying is that although agentic AI will make that whole process much more efficient, much more smarter, and much more quicker in seconds, is not completely replacing humans, because there are some cases that are really very hard, right, to deal with. Agentic AI should be able to have the capacity to triage those cases for humans to then look into and come in, right? So that's one that we call that human in the loop. So they're still a human being somehow, but you don't necessarily require that number of people in the team to be dealing with that. Those people can then use that time to do more meaningful and more strategic work. That's where the whole efficiency gain and cost saving comes in. So that's one. The same thing for the fraud side. For the fraud side of things, you also have AI agents collaborating together, one specialized in this, one specialized in that. But ultimately, what they are doing in splits of a second, going through millions of patterns of a customer data to actually flag or recognize, is there any anomaly different from how they usually carry out their transactions, location, devices they are using, time they are assessing these things. Is there any anomaly that can be detected and flag that in a split of a second? Again, that will usually take a human being or even existing static based solutions. It will take them days or hours or minutes to complete. But agentic AI, because there are many of them working together, doing that in a split of a second. So again, it saves time, but again, you can have humans in the loop for some cases that are very, very complicated to deal with. So in summary, AI is not replacing human or those people doing that work. It will make it quicker for them. It will make it more accurate and more precise for them, but it can also free up their time to actually use their time to do more strategic work in this case. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. So as a follow-up to that question, what I'm getting is that agentic AI relies heavily on on data, and when it comes to fraud detection, there is a part of it that is maybe scanning through certain database that might not exactly be available to private organizations, right? But then this is Nigeria, and there is this issue with us not even having a centralized database, right? You cannot wake up tomorrow morning and say, you know what, I'm going to that one government agency that has all of the data that I need. You simply cannot almost find it in Nigeria. So usually when you're doing your driver's license, you have to supply certain personal data to them, right? When you want to register them the next day, maybe for BVN or something, almost the same data that you supplied yesterday, you are resupplying again. Then when you have to renew your voters card, the same one that you supplied the other day, you are resupplying. And each of these government organizations, it looks like they have some kind of, should I say, technical beef. Let me say it that way. Is it like a kind of technical beef? If I collect my own data, you don't have visibility into it. So everyone has to replicate this process. But now we are talking about fraud detection that relies heavily on verifying large volumes of data, right? Data that may not necessarily be available to just one private organization. So how then do we manage that? How do we manage that system to ensure that we have an effective system and we are still able to latch in on the, should I say, like a database that we can possibly have in Nigeria that maybe we really do not have yet? So yeah, Dr. Obum.
Okay, I think Dr. Babatunde will probably have more answer to that, given he's in the regulatory space. But I think there are things that are already happening, which is good actually, which is not where we were, say 3-5 years ago in Nigeria. That is actually good, right? So like the NIN database, you can now make a call, an API call to their database or something and validate they validate a document, right? So that's good progress. It wasn't there how many years ago. We also work in insurance, right? Insurance claim, detecting fraud and all that. There is the NIID, which is where like all the policy, if you take out a policy, you have a database, a centralized database that you can also validate whether a policy is valid or not. So there are some of those centralized databases that are coming up, and credit to the government or the regulatory authorities for putting those in place. There is also like credit registry in Nigeria where you can make some assess whether there is a fraud that has been committed before. There are some of those centralized databases that are popping up, which is actually good for the ecosystem. Having said all that, is still a big challenge, a challenge that we must acknowledge, that we need more of these centralized ecosystem data, whether in partnership with NIBS, CBN, and other regulators. And we need more of those centralized databases to make these solutions much more effective. We need more sharing of data, of course, as long as it's in a way that's compliance with regulations. So it's still a big challenge, I must say, but there is some progress. But I think Babatunde will have more informed opinion on that, given that that whole space is a space.
Thank you, sir. And I'm actually going to even tag in Zach and actually also tag in Onye, because I think this is a question all of us must answer together. To the first part of the question, I actually don't know why the different government agencies can't play nice together. Everybody, I mean, I don't know if there are any government people on the call, but there are some certain people that would suggest that those are revenue generating exercises. When, I mean, if one person does it for everybody, then the people that would collect budget to be able to do it for themselves, maybe. So I'm not the one saying that. There's certain people that might suggest that. So I don't know why. I think there is the government has moved towards a kind of harmonization of well, there are talks about harmonizing your digital identity. I think there are a lot of use cases in other countries where you could point to. I think Estonia is probably one of the standouts in the world around digital identity, where there's just one and that basically has everything. I think there are risks to that, and I would love to hear Onye's thoughts about the risks. If you have all your data synchronized in one registry and then access around that and all of that stuff. So on the government side, I don't pretend to know all the issues, but you are right in that if we move to a place where you don't have to replicate every institution, giving them your data, giving them your BVN, biometrics, all of that stuff, that would be fantastic. On the private sector side, one thing that I'm really, really excited about is the open data framework. The CBN has announced that we're moving in that direction. I think there's so many possibilities that exist in the space around. I think people have talked about shared KYC. People have talked about sharing information for detection. So I'm really watching the space to see what happens there. It's a scenario that is a scenario where the private sector have basically said we want to take the lead in trying to make sure that there is some kind of harmonization, and not necessarily harmonization, but speaking to each other and sharing information. The reason why I wanted to tag Zach in, because I know that with Archer Protect, one of the things that he's quite familiar with is that kind of aggregation of bad actors, and how that could be used as a way to sanitize the financial industry a bit more. So yeah, I'm going to tag with your permission, Victoria. I'm going to tag in on you to talk about the larger data, because I know that. Sorry, just to put more context.
Are you on salary at Tech Hive?
No. But I'm just.
I feel like they paid you to run the event. You're doing a great job.
I'm just a big fan of what they're doing. I'm a big fan of what they're doing. So I know that there are some certain government organizations that have been fined for data. Well, I think there is at least one, and so I mean, just kind of that context and that color would be great for Monier and the team. And obviously, Zach, I mean, with Archer Protect, you guys have that database, so it would be good to hear what you think about the points as well. So yeah, tagging the both of you in. Sorry for my long-winded response.
It's fine. Yeah, Zach.
Let me collect my thoughts after the response. When you go ahead.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Dr. Babatunde. First, I'll start by saying that great point has been made regarding why we need unified data. And I also want to say that the goal really is for us to sort of have a national trusted data ecosystem. And the reason for that is because if you have a national trusted ecosystem, it's easy for the private sector to plug into what you already have. It's easier that way than for you to have private sectors doing it. Sadly, so the government usually is slower in conversations around this, which shouldn't be. So it'd be great to have like a national ecosystem, and it has to be proactive and not reactive. What you find is that something happens and a step is taken. So it's a reactive approach to these issues instead of proactive. I also would say that the NIN system is definitely like gold, something like if we do a lot of work on, we are able to work around it. Sadly, so again, let me mention that as much as that system is fantastic, it also has its own loopholes, because I'm aware of people that have more than one NIN, right? Bearing two different names. So they use it based on convenience. So they use this one when they want to do this and use another one. So there are definitely loopholes in the system, but it's definitely something good that we can plug into and make work. Now, what is, the bounty has asked me to talk about what the risk would be, but I think I'll first start by saying, why is this critical for fraud detection and compliance? The first thing is, if we're able to get a trusted national data ecosystem, one of the first things that we'll start to do is to fix the issues with identity fraud. It's easier that way, because I can go to Kano State and present one identity and go to another state and present a different identity, right? So there's a big gap and loophole. So the first thing is that we can solve identity fraud. Identity fraud is something that is recurring, right? So most of our, for lack of a better word, permit me to say Pablo Pablets happens with identity fraud, right? So it can also help us to improve our KYC AML compliance. So you want to do KYC, your background, the background check that the organizations are doing, the banks are doing. If we have those kind of systems, it can help with that. It can help us with, of course, smarter fraud detection, and I can go on and on and on. But when it's time for us to talk about, and that is why I am really looking forward to see what will happen with NIN. It could take a couple of years, because every government comes in with different priorities. A government started it, but at some point, so the priority was, let's just start something. And that government comes and says, let's integrate NIN with what the immigration is doing. So if you want to get a passport now, they will ask you for your NIN. So they sort of do that integration. After you apply, they would have to confirm from the NIMC if what you've provided is correct. And if it's not correct, just go back to the NIMC. Fantastic. It's good to see that happen with Federal Road Safety, see that happen with our BVN, just see a lot of those integrations. But again, as we do this, it's important that we build trust. And trust is not always about what happens in the immediate. When I'm coming to apply for my NIN, I'm coming to apply to get a new passport, it is not what happens to me at that point that determines trust. Trust is something that is built into the entire system, right? So it is good that we build trust in the entire system, so that we can address the issues of data privacy concerns. Because what that would then mean is that if at any point there is a small breach, any kind of breach, it can affect an entire ecosystem. So we must actually build trust, not just from a legal standpoint now, because I expect that when all these things come to play, there will be regulations and there will be laws to guard against it. But even from an operational standpoint, which I believe that Zach will come in as well, from an operational standpoint, to say, how do we then build trust when now, it's not after we build, it's as we are building. So as we are trying to integrate NIN with what NIMC and the immigration NIS has together, the immigration service, right? We also want to look at what exactly some of the risk again would also be with how do we unify? Because now, like you said, we have different systems, BVN, the banks are doing their thing, CBN is doing its thing. So how do we then start to unify all these systems so that they are not in small fragments? So we need to unify them, right? And also training of the people who will be working on the back end, because you will not be surprised to see a situation whereby something is printed from the system and you're buying bully down the street and they're using your data in a sheet to wrap corn for you. So a lot of training has to happen with the guys who are managing it back end, because they're public servants. So you have to train them in the language they understand, make them understand it in their own language. You have to, if you need to gamify it, gamify, but make them understand it, right? The way you would train university students is not the way you would train a maybe level 13 officer in the Nigerian civil service. It's important, right? So if we want to really have these serious conversations, we must really be asking ourselves the questions of, how do we, not just from a legal standpoint, how do we operationalize? And how do we ensure that there is consistent training and follow up? And this conversation is not just for the government. Private sector plays a more important role. I feel like the private sector at this point, and it's important that we're all here, has to act as a watchdog, an unemployed watchdog in what we're doing. So we'll have the regulators, but private sector has to always ensure that at some point or the other, you are providing some form of advisory to say, this is what we need to do. So those are some of the ways that I look at it, but a national data ecosystem would be great. The private sector can plug into that. It has its own challenges as well, but it can just start slowly and surely. Over to you now, Zach.
That was very passionate. I feel like I was at church. So no, it was really good. Yeah, guys, I got some bad news for everyone on this call. Okay, said I was going to speak the harsh truth, so I guess we're getting to some harsh truths. In theory, we should have a centralized database in Nigeria. Yes, in theory, that's a great idea to avoid redundancy. And I agree that if you go to get a passport and it's not matching your NIN, that should be rectified, right? So talking between documentation, talking between departments, that's a great idea. But the idea of now consolidating everything into one central place, it would be one of the most risky things we would do in Nigeria. Here's why. So every source of data in Nigeria is in some way corrupted. I'll give you specific examples. The BVN failed to be a universally reliable way of seeing someone's identity because agents were paid to create fake BVNs. So who did this? Fraudsters did this. And then fraudsters could even become agents and create their own BVNs. The amounts of fraudulent BVNs at Archer, when we're detecting fraudulent BVNs, the amount that we've seen is ridiculous. So then people will say, at least we have the NIN. Thank you, NIMSI. We've seen even more fraudulent NINs than we've seen BVNs. And it's not just, oh, someone wants to have 2 NINs because they have many names. Maybe at their naming ceremony, they had extra people come, and now they have so many names, they can create tons of, maybe 3 NINs if they wanted. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about hundreds of NINs for one person. So if we create a centralized system that every source of truth is reliant on one database, if that one database is corrupted, everything is corrupted. At least right now. If I want to check someone's NIN and it's suspicious, I can at least ask them for the BVN. And now they have to do extra fraud to have a fake NIN and a fake BVN. Okay? So at least I can cross-reference between these separate systems. In Nigeria, it's essential that we keep them separate right now. The NIN was an amazing idea, a centralized identity number, but the rollout was not fully done well. If we have a centralized system, we would have the same thing happening with that. So until the problem is fixed with the NIN, we need to have separation of identity systems. Like the fact that there's a BVN and NIN seems crazy now. Like, hey, why do we have 2 numbers? We should just have 1. I'm telling you, better to just check on the 2 numbers than to have 1 right now. This is not good, by the way, for fintechs and banks, because now you have to pay to look up on the NIN. So Tunde talked about revenue generating exercises. Now I have to pay to check the BVN verification. I have to pay to check the NIN verification. So now you're adding KYC costs. That's fine. It's better than being frauded. There's also ways to lower costs. So you can, for example, you can do one lookup at a time. So you don't have to look up every database at one time. You can go sequentially and knock out bad guys as you go. So you don't waste money doing all these lookups on the bad guys. So anyway, that's my harsh truth for the day.
Thank you very much, Zach. So we've had like very, very interesting perspectives. Should we have a central database? Maybe not, so that we can have different sorts of rules, and then it can make fraud detection and fraudulent actors even have to work extra hard to get these things done. An amazing perspective. So we're coming to the close of the conversation now. Please, to our audience listening to us, if you have any question, you can just drop them in the chat box so that we can take them very shortly. So I'll come to Onyinye, and I'll come to Onyinye very shortly on a point that she had made before, right? So she said sometimes, and in fact most times, the regulations that we have when it comes to fraud detection are usually reactive. So there would have been maybe certain incidences that seem to form a trend, and then you have a regulation that will then address the trend. But it looks like laws will continue to ever play catch up if we have to continue that way. And bad actors are becoming smarter. They are thinking of new ways to perpetuate fraud, and they are working overtime. They are working extra hard to be good at it and to perfect their trade, right? So the question is, how can regulatory authorities, or what are the measures that regulatory authorities can put in place to ensure that, to a very large extent, we don't always have to play catch up with our regulation, right? So it could be something as simple as even having outcome-based regulations. For instance, in the Nigerian Data Protection Act, you see provisions like data controllers and data processors should process personal data in a lawful, fair, and transparent manner. Maybe not exactly saying that this is what you should do in that sense, but this should be the expected outcome, right? So how do you think we can manage that with fraud detection? And then there is a question for everybody. See that we are like getting close to the end of the conversation. I want us to answer like very short, like very, very short answer. 30 seconds answer for everybody on this question, and I want you to answer this question at the end of our initial question, and that would be, how can we operationalize fraud detection by design? I know she mentioned it earlier when she was speaking. So how can we operationalize fraud detection by design, especially for businesses operating in Nigeria? So Onyinye, you have the floor.
All right, thank you very much, Victoria. Just to be sure that I got your question, the first question is how we can operationalize fraud detection by design. No, that's the second question. The first one is how we're able to ensure that we're not reactive, but we take more responsible approach to things, right? I'll start by saying that, let me start with the second question on how we can operationalize fraud detection by design. Nigeria is one country that has a lot of policies, documentation, laws, not just Nigeria, not just the public space, even private entities. I think that it's important that first we think policies, we think principles, right? We think principles over policies, and that does not mean that policies are not in place, but it means that the principles are like the watchwords. So when I say principles, I don't just mean things that are written down as principles, but I also mean that in how we act and in how everything is structured, right? Not everything is going to be put in place on a system. Certain things are, so we'll see a lot of principles in procedures, principles in processes, principles in systems, right? So if we're saying that there's a principle of transparency, principle of fairness, right? So we must ensure that principles are ingrained in our entire system, our entire process, our entire operation. So we must ensure that the principles are at the core of what we do, right? When we do that by principle, it almost becomes like, I want to use the word default, but I use that word carefully, right? That when something comes into our system, right, we can easily detect it, or we can easily say that this thing goes against our principles. So I would say that the first thing is principles over policies. And principle over policy does not mean principle replaces policy. It just means that even as we're looking at our policies, what we are watching out for is what are the principles ingrained in our policies? What are the principles ingrained in our processes and even in our operation? So that's one of the ways that we can try to really see how we can operationalize fraud detection by design. And it's very important again because the second thing we can even start to look at on what are the ways to operationalize fraud detection by design is that we start to pay keen attention to global awareness, right? And global awareness in the sense of sometimes before a particular kind of actions, fraud actions comes into a jurisdiction, it starts in another jurisdiction, right? So when it starts in that jurisdiction, so you want to have a lot of awareness happening, right? So you know that, oh, this is happening in a particular jurisdiction, and you're asking yourself, when I come into my own systems, how can this play out? So it's always good. You may also need to maybe internally now sort of create a Chinese wall and say, have some of your team members think like they are the ones who are the fraud actors, right? Have some of those exercises happen periodically. Let them think like they're the fraud actors and say, this happened in, say, for instance, Estonia. It's not in Nigeria yet, but let's assume it happens in Nigeria. How would this, so you want to do like constant testing, like a stress test, right? Let's do a stress test on our system. If something goes wrong and something like this happens in our organization, how would that play out, right? And don't make it, so it should be something that is done periodically. So this test should happen periodically, right? Such that even before anything occurs, I can tell that, or I can see that there is a loophole here and there is a gap here. You also want to, by design, you also want to have like external evaluators coming to evaluate your system, right? And say, oh, based on our evaluation of your system and your processes, these are some of the things that we find could be some of the gaps or loopholes. Somebody can plug into this loophole. That discovery should happen even before it happens. So that's why it has to be like periodic reviews and periodic checks of what is happening and what is going on. So that is one way that you can try to operationalize fraud detection by design. And I speak for organizations, right? For the public sector now, maybe for the regulator, how they can even start to operationalize it is, and I'll touch on the first question you asked, which is the fact that why does it look like the law would always catch up? Sadly, so the law, at least for now, the law is simply catching up, right? Would always catch up. And that's because when we think compliance, we cannot think of compliance and innovation as opposites. We actually have to think of them as compliance has to consistently be innovative. Because the moment we think of them as opposites, it looks like, oh, an innovation has happened that is affecting our compliance, right? So it has to be thought of as they are piece to a pod or twins, right? So if you think of compliance as innovation, as, oh, compliance should be innovative, it's easy for us that way to be able for maybe the regulator now to say that what are the innovative approaches that are happening now in the industry that they manage, right? And also be closer to the operators. So if a regulator is close to the operator, as much as the law may catch up with fraud or fraud detection, as much as there's a catch up that is going to happen, it will not be so far-fetched, right? So most times what you see that is that they release a lot of guidelines and a lot of regulations even before a proper act is done. So another approach will be, don't always be willing to release, don't always look, the regulators can always look at it as want to release an act or want to release a law of the National Assembly. It can even start with, let's start with a guideline, let's start with a circular, right? So that way you're able to quickly fix what needs to be fixed. So you start with a guideline, start with a circular before you can even have something that is an act of the National Assembly. So that could be some of the ways that the laws would always play catch up, at least at the moment, until we're able to start to look at, because if you start to do a lot of presumptions of what can happen, you can stifle the ecosystem, right? So if the law wants to be ahead, it will do a lot of presumptions and that can stifle the ecosystem. So it's important that we look beyond just immediately having acts of the National Assembly to say, what can we do momentarily? Circulars, guideline, right? And maybe later we can then say, let's have acts of the National Assembly. And most times, guidelines and circulars will always give you the easier route to solving the problems. So those are like summarily some of the ways that we can start to look at the conversation.
I was doing it again, speaking while I was muted. Sorry. So now I'll come to Dr. Obum, right? In 30 seconds. Promise
Okay.
me 30 seconds. Yeah, 30 seconds.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
So two things to say. I think in terms of the design principles of operationalizing it, the first one is to have the mindset of prevention rather than detection. I think what's happening in many cases is people are detecting fraud when it's already happened. But we should have the mindset of prevention, which is being much more proactive than being reactive. So that's first. The second thing is in the corporate environment, companies are usually very successful. Businesses that work in a cross-functional nature, acknowledging the expertise the legal team brings, the compliance team, and all these teams bring. In fraud and prevention, we should also adopt that when we're operationalizing fraud systems. And making sure that our KYC team or compliance team, legal team, internal audit, they are all working together, not in silos, in designing and implementing fraud solution. That's when you will have an effective solution rather than siloed operations.
All right. Thank you very much. So Zach, you're up next. 30 seconds.
Unfortunately, in Nigeria, but also in almost every country in the world, regulations for financial services are not 100% aligned with fraud prevention. I can be 100% compliant with a central bank's regulations, and there could still be tons of fraud. Why? Why is that? The central bank is a regulator. That's a specific skill. A tech company, a digital bank, or a traditional bank, they're offering financial services. There are specific departments that are constantly monitoring for new fraud trends within the bank or fintech. Okay, this is a science. Okay, you're measuring data on your customers, and then there's an art to it of making decisions on tricky cases, trying new rules. But this is a profession. This profession has been developing every year. It is so advanced that someone who has been in the central bank of any country for 5, 10, 20 years is not going to even know the questions to ask about this. Okay, they're separate. And again, this is not a Nigeria problem. This is Europe, US, Canada. I'll give you a specific example. There is no regulation in the central bank of Nigeria governing how many users can there be at a bank on one mobile phone, on one device. Okay. But I am telling you, as the guy who uses AI to prevent fraud every day in Nigeria, that controlling the number of users that can be on a device is the most simple and one of the first steps to having any fraud prevention system at a bank or fintech. It's so fundamental to preventing fraud that you would be foolish to not do it. Yet there's no there's no idea of even talking about this at a central bank level. That's the disconnect. So the advice is, hey, be compliant. Let's file suspicious activity. Let's maintain we have the right transaction limits, the right user limits according to regulation. But that does not make you free of fraud. They are two overlapping, but still separate things.
Thank you very much. So now we're back to you, Dr. Babatunde.
30 seconds? Do I still have 30 seconds?
Let's say 1 minute.
Well, I mean, it's fine. I only need 30 seconds. Maybe 45. Just confirming the question is how we can incorporate privacy by design principles. I think the simple response to that is look to the GID. There is specifically in, I think it's Article 28 or so, the things that you should 2811 or so, the things that you should be looking. I think there's 7 principles. Some of them Dr. Ovum already touched on. I think the critical thing from my perspective is that I'm glad that Nigerian regulations, and I spent a lot of my time looking at different regulations and legislation. Nigerian regulation is starting to move towards outcome based. So there's 2 types of regulations. You have your rule based regulations and your outcome based regulations. Rule based is you must not do X, Y, Z. If you have those kind of regulations, the world is moving so fast. X, Y, Z is not enough. You need to add A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. And so everyone is moving from there. And so with outcome based, you're saying this is what we're trying to achieve. How you get there is your own internal problem and whatever evidence how you get there. And so a lot of the regulations that we're seeing is going into that space. And I'm glad that privacy by design focuses on the principles rather than a list of things that you need to do. It says this is what you should be looking at, whether it's end-to-end security compliance, and whether it's end-to-end, whether it's being a bit proactive around building privacy protections, whether it's about privacy as an automatic setting, not making it opt out, not making it opt out, that making it opt in. So all of those principles are the things that I'm glad that we're seeing. So yeah, look to the GID, go on the principles and the outcomes rather than looking for specific a rule book on what you need to be doing. So yeah, those are my 45 seconds.
All right, thank you very much. So Dr. Babatune, I want you to, we have a question in the chat box, so I would read it out. I want you to answer the question in 30 seconds this time around. All right, so the question is, what should be the focus in fraud detection, the false positives or the false negatives?
I think that's one of those questions where it's a difficult answer to give because it depends on the organization. What are you trying to optimize for? If you're focusing on the false positive, I think you need to look at, okay, what is so false positives is some in transaction monitoring. You flag something as that it should have, that this is a potential for suspicious or fraudulent transaction. In reality, it is not. Now, in that scenario, if you've built processes on the back of that, well, if you build processes on the back of that, of flagging transactions, for instance, pausing, blocking transactions, then you have a ripple effect of what could happen if you are flagging too many false positives. So my opinion, the focus should be on false, but that's my opinion. The focus should be on reducing your false positives, because then you have the situation that Zach suggested, where people are emailing the CBN and copying everybody and their mothers. And so yeah, so that is, but it depends, because in a situation where it's false negatives, is you're saying that something wasn't it, and in reality it was it. And so that one is a bit more insidious because you are missing things. This one, you're stopping things that you shouldn't have stopped. The other one, you're missing things. And so you don't want to be missing things. But when you miss things, I think the effect is that is at least the effect is not as the ripple effect isn't as great. So yeah, I think is a question that is based on your own internal processes. But I would always say that you should focus on the false positive, because you can control that to a certain extent. You can control that more. So yeah, that's my response.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you very much to everyone that has joined us today. We have come to the end of the webinar. We don't want to overshoot our time. We'll make the recording available, and we'll also post our post-event summary. So this webinar is part of the Hive Pulse Point series. Next month, we'll have another webinar, and we sincerely do hope that you'll join us. Big thank you to our speakers today, Dr. Babatunde Obe, Dr. Obum, who is not the Obe, but has a title OBE. Then to our woman in the middle, Onyo Kolo, and then to Zach. Thank you very much for joining us, for taking our time out of your busy schedule to be a part of this conversation, and for making the conversation very insightful. Trust me, I went off script a lot of times, and that's how much insight I got from everything that everyone has said on the call today. So thank you very much. And to our participants, we appreciate you for joining. My name is Victoria Daramola. I work at Tech Hive Advisory. Thank you very much. We'll see you again next month. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.